The world is a very busy place, and sometimes a few days can feel like a lifetime. The period from July 13th to July 23rd, 2025, was one of those times. It was a short window of just 10 days, but the events that happened were huge. They changed things for many countries and for millions of people. We saw big decisions about war and peace, major shifts in how countries trade with each other, and surprising political changes inside nations. For people learning English, understanding these events helps you understand the world we live in. It shows how connected we all are, no matter where we live. These 10 days were especially important for the global stage. In the Middle East, the long and painful conflict in Gaza reached a new level of crisis, forcing many powerful countries to speak out together. In Eastern Europe, the war between Russia and Ukraine continued with new attacks, even as leaders talked about finding peace. Meanwhile, the United States was making big moves in Asia, using money and trade to build new partnerships. These events were not separate stories. They were all connected, like different parts of a very complicated machine. Each action in one part of the world caused a reaction somewhere else. For India, this was also a very important time. The country was not just watching these global events from the side. It was right in the middle of them, making difficult choices. India had to decide its position on the war in Gaza, balancing its old friendships with its new strategic needs. At the same time, big things were happening at home. A top leader suddenly resigned. A major court decision changed the lives of people who had been in jail for almost 20 years, and the government was busy making new friends and signing new deals around the world. So let's take a closer look at what happened during this incredible 10-day period. We will break down each major event, step by step. We will look at the facts and the numbers to understand the real human story behind the headlines. From the streets of Gaza and the battlefields of Ukraine to the halls of power in Washington and New Delhi, this was a time of great change. Understanding this period helps us see the challenges and opportunities facing our world today and how a country like India is finding its way through it all. In the middle of July 2025, the situation in Gaza became a complete catastrophe. The numbers tell a story of incredible suffering. By July 16th, the total number of people killed since the war began had reached a shocking 58,573. In just 1 week, from July 9th to July 16th, another 648 Palestinians were killed. Think about that. It is like an entire school of people disappearing every week. The number of injured people was even higher, at over 139,000. These are not just numbers, they are mothers, fathers, and children whose lives have been torn apart by the ongoing violence. The crisis was not just about the fighting, it was also about a severe lack of food and medicine. Reports from the United Nations and other aid groups described a peak level of starvation. Children were suffering the most. The rate of severe malnutrition among young children jumped from 2.4% in February to 8.8% in July. In the first 2 weeks of July, at least 10 children died from starvation. One hospital reported that 21 children died from hunger in just 72 hours. This is a nightmare happening in slow motion, where the most vulnerable people are paying the highest price for a war they did not start. Getting help to people was almost impossible. Aid organizations planned to move food and medicine, but they were often stopped. In the first half of July, almost half of all planned aid movements were either blocked or had to be cancelled because it was too dangerous. Even the places where people went to find safety were not safe. Shelters set up in schools, meant to protect families who had lost their homes, were attacked. Between July 8th and July 10th, 3 different schools being used as shelters were hit, killing 17 people who were just trying to survive. The danger was everywhere. Even the simple act of trying to get food could be deadly. On July 23rd, Israeli forces killed at least 2 people near an aid center in the city of Rafah. This was not a one-time event. Between May and July, over 850 people were killed while they were waiting for or trying to collect aid. This created a terrible choice for families: stay in a shelter and risk starving, or go out to find food and risk being killed. This was the reality for the people of Gaza, a horrifying cycle of violence, hunger, and fear with no end in sight. As the crisis in Gaza grew worse, the world could no longer stay silent. On July 21st, a large group of 28 countries, including some of the most powerful nations like the G7 members and the European Union, came together to send a strong message. They released a joint statement that was very clear. It said that the war must end now. They were very critical of how little aid was being allowed into Gaza, calling it a drip feeding of aid. They also condemned the inhumane killing of civilians and warned that they were prepared to take further action if things did not change. This was a big moment because it showed that Israel was losing support from some of its most important allies. These countries were saying that the situation had gone too far and that the humanitarian suffering was unacceptable. However, Israel's government did not agree. The Israeli Foreign Ministry responded quickly, saying that the statement from the 28 countries was disconnected from reality. They blamed Hamas for the continuation of the war, arguing that their actions were only in self-defense. This showed a deep disagreement between Israel and a large part of the international community. In the middle of this global debate was India. India has a long history of supporting the Palestinian people and has always called for a two-state solution, where both Israelis and Palestinians have their own independent countries. However, in recent years, India has also built a very strong relationship with Israel, especially in areas like defense and technology. This put India in a difficult position. It had to choose between its historical position and its modern strategic interests. This balancing act became very clear in its actions at the United Nations. India's choice was to be careful. When the United Nations General Assembly voted on a resolution in June that was critical of Israel, India decided to abstain, which means it did not vote yes or no. It was the only country in South Asia and the only member of the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to do so. This sent a signal to the world. It showed that while India still officially supports a two-state solution, it is not willing to publicly criticize Israel. This decision shows how India is navigating a complex world, trying to maintain good relationships with all sides. While the world's attention was on the Middle East, the war in Ukraine was also getting worse. In mid-July 2025, Russia launched a major new series of attacks. On July 19th, Russia sent hundreds of drones across Ukraine. These were not just aimed at military targets. The drones hit civilian areas in the capital city, Kyiv, and in other cities across the country. This showed that Russia was continuing its strategy of trying to break the will of the Ukrainian people by attacking their homes and infrastructure. At this point in the war, Russia controlled about 20% of Ukraine's land, a huge area that it was not willing to give up. These attacks were happening at the same time that leaders were talking about peace. A new round of peace talks was planned to happen in Turkey. Turkey has often tried to be a mediator in this conflict, helping to find a middle ground between Russia and Ukraine. However, even before the talks started, there was not much hope for a breakthrough. The Russian government, through its officials in the Kremlin, said that people should not have high expectations. They made it clear that their main goals had not changed at all since the war started. Russia's demands remained the same. First, they insisted that Ukraine must promise to never join NATO, the military alliance of Western countries. Russia sees NATO's expansion as a direct threat to its own security. Second, Russia demanded that Ukraine must officially recognize the territories that Russia has annexed or taken over as part of Russia. For Ukraine, these demands are impossible to accept. Giving up their right to join alliances and giving away their land would mean losing their sovereignty and accepting defeat. This fundamental disagreement is why the war has continued for so long. This situation has been called a talk-and-fight strategy. This means that Russia is willing to participate in peace talks, but at the same time, it continues its military attacks. The fighting puts pressure on Ukraine and its allies, while the talking gives the impression that Russia is open to a diplomatic solution. But as long as the core demands from both sides are so far apart, any real peace seems very distant. The events of mid-July showed this clearly. While diplomats prepared to talk, ordinary Ukrainians were still facing attacks from the sky. On the other side of the world, the United States was busy changing the rules of trade and security in Asia. The American government, under the Trump administration, was using tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods, as a powerful tool to achieve its goals. One of the biggest moves was a new trade deal with Japan. For a long time, the US had threatened to put a huge 25% tariff on Japanese products. But in July 2025, they reached what was called a massive deal instead. This new deal set a lower 15% tariff on goods from both countries. This deal was about more than just tariffs. As part of the agreement, Japan promised to invest a massive $550 billion in the United States. This money would help create jobs and build factories in America. In return, the deal also opened up Japan's markets to American products, especially cars, trucks, and agricultural goods like farm products. This was a big win for American farmers and companies. The news was so good for Japan, which had avoided the higher tariff, that its main stock market, the Nikkei 225, jumped by 3.5%. It showed how economic policy can be used as a political weapon. The United States also made a similar but different kind of deal with the Philippines. This was called a strategic pact, which means it was about both economics and military cooperation. The US placed a 19% tariff on goods imported from the Philippines. In exchange, the Philippines agreed to become a zero-tariff open market for American goods. This meant that American companies could sell their products in the Philippines without paying any taxes, giving them a big advantage. This deal was designed to pull the Philippines closer to the United States and away from China's economic influence. This pact with the Philippines was also about security. The agreement included stronger military cooperation between the two countries. It also required the Philippines to align its own rules with American export controls, which are laws that limit the sale of certain technologies to other countries. This was a direct move to counter China's growing power in the region. By using these trade deals and tariffs, the United States was not just trying to sell more products. It was actively reshaping its alliances, strengthening its friendships, and trying to build a stronger front against its main competitor, China. Section 6. Big changes in India. A resignation shakes New Delhi. While India was managing its role in the world, big things were happening inside the country. On July 21st, the nation was surprised by a major political announcement. The Vice President of India, Jagdeep Dhankar, resigned from his position. The official reason he gave was health concerns. However, many people were skeptical and did not believe this was the full story. Just 10 days before his resignation, he had publicly said that he planned to serve his entire term as vice president. This sudden change made people wonder what was really going on behind the scenes in New Delhi. The timing of the resignation led to a lot of speculation. Many political experts believe it was connected to a power struggle within the government. The vice president also serves as the chairman of the upper house of parliament, the Rajya Sabha. Recently, he had made a decision that went against the government's wishes. He had allowed the opposition parties to introduce a motion to remove a high court judge. This was a very controversial move, and it seems that it may have created a conflict between him and the ruling party. His resignation was seen by many as the result of this political disagreement. At the same time, the Indian Parliament was stuck in a deadlock during its monsoon session. The session, which is supposed to be a time for making new laws and debating important issues, was not able to get much work done. The opposition parties were protesting and repeatedly stopping the proceedings. There were two main reasons for their protests. The first was about the special intensive revision of electoral rolls, which are the lists of voters in the state of Bihar. The opposition was worried that this process was not fair and could affect the election results. The second major issue causing the deadlock was a new law called the Income Tax Bill, 2025. The opposition was very concerned about new powers this bill would give to tax officers. These new rules would allow the government to conduct digital searches of people's computers, phones, and online accounts. The opposition argued that this was a violation of privacy and could be used to target political opponents. Because of these strong disagreements, the parliament was noisy and chaotic, and very little progress was made on a number of important national issues during this period. Another major event that captured India's attention in July 2025 was a court decision that was nearly 2 decades in the making. On July 21st, the Bombay High Court made a stunning ruling in the case of the 2006 Mumbai serial train blasts. These were a series of terrible bombs that exploded on commuter trains in Mumbai, killing many people. For this crime, 12 men had been arrested and convicted. They had spent almost 18 years in prison. But in its new verdict, the High Court acquitted all of them, which means it found them not guilty. The court's decision was a huge criticism of the investigation that was done years ago. The judges said that the prosecution, which is the team of lawyers arguing that the men were guilty, had completely failed to prove its case. They found that the evidence presented by the Maharashtra Anti-Terrorism Squad was not reliable. For the 12 men and their families, this was a moment of release after years of fighting to prove their innocence. But for the victims of the blasts and for the country, it raised difficult questions about the justice system. The verdict immediately created a new legal and political storm. The government of the state of Maharashtra announced that it would not accept the High Court's decision. They said they would appeal the case to the highest court in the country, the Supreme Court of India. The case was considered so important that the Supreme Court immediately agreed to hear it. It scheduled an urgent hearing for July 24th, just 3 days after the High Court's verdict. This showed how serious the situation was, and the final chapter of this long legal battle was still not written. This case highlights a very important and often painful issue in India: the long delays in the justice system. It took almost 2 decades for this verdict to come from the High Court. During that time, the accused men remained in prison. The final decision from the Supreme Court will take even more time. The case brings up serious questions about police investigations, the use of evidence, and the long wait for justice that many people in India face. It shows that even when a court makes a decision, the story is often far from over. In the midst of all this global and domestic turmoil, India was also actively working to strengthen its position in the world. Diplomacy was a key focus. A very important trip was planned for Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the United Kingdom on July 23rd and 24th. The main purpose of this visit was to sign a new free trade agreement with the UK. This is a very big deal. An FTA is an agreement between two countries to make it easier and cheaper to buy and sell goods to each other. This specific deal was expected to be a game changer for Indian businesses. The India-UK FTA was expected to remove tariffs on about 99% of all Indian exports to the United Kingdom. This means that Indian companies could sell their products in the UK without paying the usual taxes, making their goods cheaper and more competitive. This could lead to a big increase in trade between the two countries and create new opportunities for Indian industries. Following his trip to the UK, the Prime Minister was also scheduled to visit the Maldives on July 25th and 26th. The goal of this visit was to reset the relationship with the small island nation, which had become tense in recent times. These diplomatic efforts were paying off in other ways too. A new report called the Henley Passport Index for 2025 was released, and it had good news for India. This index measures how powerful a country's passport is based on how many other countries a citizen can visit without needing a visa beforehand. The Indian passport had climbed up to the 77th position in the world rankings. This was a significant improvement. It meant that Indian passport holders could now travel to 59 countries, either visa-free or by getting a visa on arrival. This might seem like a small thing, but it is actually very important. A stronger passport makes it easier for Indian business people to travel for work, for students to study abroad, and for tourists to explore the world. It is a sign that India's global standing is improving and that other countries see India as a trusted partner. All of these developments, the new trade deal with the UK, the diplomatic outreach to the Maldives, and the more powerful passport, show a clear strategy. India is working hard to build stronger economic and political connections around the world. The 10 days from July 13th to July 23rd, 2025, were like a snapshot of our modern world, complex, fast-moving, and full of challenges. We saw deep human suffering in Gaza and a global community struggling to respond. We saw an old war in Europe grinding on, with peace talks offering little more than a glimmer of hope. We saw a powerful nation using economic tools to redraw the map of alliances in Asia. These events show us that the world is in a constant state of instability, where problems in one region can quickly affect everyone else. For India, this period was a perfect example of the careful dance it must perform on the world stage. The country had to balance its principles with its interests, as seen in its position on the Gaza conflict. It had to manage its own internal political dramas, like the vice president's resignation and debates in parliament, while also looking outward. India is no longer just a regional power, it is a global player. Its decisions matter not only to its own 1.4 billion people, but also to the rest of the world. The events of these 10 days also showed India's ambition. The push for a major trade deal with the United Kingdom and the efforts to mend ties with neighbors like the Maldives are signs of a country that wants to engage with the world on its own terms. The rising power of its passport is a small but meaningful symbol of this growing influence. India is trying to find its own path, building friendships with different countries, and working to create economic opportunities for its people, even as the world around it seems to become more and more uncertain. In the end, this brief but eventful period in July 2025 taught us a simple lesson. In our interconnected world, no country is an island. The conflicts, the political shifts, and the economic deals that happen thousands of miles away can have a real impact on our lives. For a rising nation like India, the challenge is to navigate this turbulent world with wisdom and strength, making choices that will ensure a more stable and prosperous future for its people, while contributing to a more peaceful world for everyone.